Hello fellow modders, this is Lunatic, and this is the first part of the very basic tutorial for modding Stalker. Holy monolith, what am I getting myself into here? Before we begin, I'd like to thank the awesome community of the STALKER Anomaly Discord. In particular, I'd like to thank Katapro, who taught me everything I needed to know to get started. You, my friend, are a true chat. Blessed is your patience. But also Elvartner, Raven Ascended, Crapsis and Firebreath, XCVB and Sneaky. You guys are awesome and I would be nowhere without you all. Shout out also to all the other great people on the Discord. You all keep this great game alive. Also, I have the most awesome loot crew of co-modders. Shrike, Octopus and Philu, just to name a few. You guys rock and are nearly as insane as me. Please note, I'm not an expert in any of this. At best, I am an interested learner, and there is still much more to learn. So if you're watching this and you know a better way to do this or that, please don't hesitate to comment and to let us all know. Same goes if I'm doing something wrong or if I'm being just a complete lunatic in how I handle things. But first things first, let's start with a need to have list of applications you should really have to get started modding Stalker. Now there's alternatives to those, I know. These are just the ones I use. I will not explain the fundamentals or the basic handling of those apps, because there are fantastic videos out there that explain everything about these apps way better than I ever could. I'll just assume you know your basics. Also, I won't go into the details on how to set everything up. If you are interested in that, let me know in the comments. I could maybe make a video about it too in the future. There are already fantastic guides in the Anomaly Discord for setting things up, so go and use those. I'll link some of the apps in the descriptions below so it's easier for you to get them. Okay, let's get started with the list. First, Notepad++ with the Compare plugin. You'll need it for all kinds of editing of LTX files, scripts, XML files, etc. etc. These topics will be covered in the next video, but I'll still list the Notepad here. Then I use Photoshop with the NVIDIA Texture Tool plugin. You can also use any other image editing software like GIMP, for example, but I don't know my way around GIMP, so I'm not going to use that. The Adobe Texture Export plugin will help you export your files in the correct DDS formats needed for Stalker textures. Then, most importantly, Blender with the Pavel Blend plugin. You can also get any other 3D modeling app, but for me, Blender is just the best. You'll need the Pavel Blend plugin in order to import, edit, and export Stalker OGF model files and OMF animation files. Next, the X-Ray SDK. You'll need it for the Pavel Blend plugin to properly work. Then, the XR toolset. It has a whole collection of very useful tools from unpacking DB files to editing THM files. The video will cover the following topics. First, having a plan. Second, textures. Third, meshes. And fourth, icons. Let's jump into it. Alright, now that we have that out of the way, let's get into the fun parts. Before beginning a new mod, it helps to really have a plan of what the heck we're actually wanting to do. So for this tutorial, I want to add the Sig P210 pistol to Anomaly. The P210 is the Swiss Army 9mm service pistol and it will go really well with my Loot Swiss family pack. Let's start with some sources for finding nice models. My usual hunting grounds are Sketchfab, ArtStation, CG Trader, and when I'm desperate, even TurboSquid. Regardless of whether you downloaded a free model or paid for one, please credit the creator of the model in your mod. Even if, like myself, you like to go full Frankenstein on some models or could create something completely crazy and new, there's still the base and the inspiration coming from that creator. Okay, so I bought this fantastic model from Akinaro. Seriously, go check out his profile. That dude's work is freaking awesome. The P210 comes in two variations, the P210 Carry and the P210 Target, which works well for my plans to have a basic version and then some special variants you can upgrade in-game with my loot weapon kits. It also comes in two different materials, a black matte and a more shiny steel variant, so this will be really great and give many options for modding the weapon. So let's have a look at the files we have here. So after unpacking this, let's have a look at the files. Okay, so you can see here we basically have mesh files, FBX format, an object format, even blend. So there's different mesh formats here. Sometimes they even add a few nice previews, as is the case here. And you can see here's a texture folder with all the different textures in it. So if you have a look at the previews, they look like this. And you can see there's even a subfolder here for steel. So he actually has provided two different texture sets, one for a more steel type and one a more dark black matte type. Of course, you can create all these things completely from scratch yourself, right? Which would be really awesome, but I don't have the skill for that, so I'm not doing this. Furthermore, before we begin anything, I want to prepare all the folders and have a general idea of what I'm doing. So for this, I created this game data folder, and inside I have all the folders that I'll need for later. I will be talking more about data structure and config files in my next video, but important is just to have those stuff set up for now. Now, after having had a look at the model, I usually like to start with the textures before going to the 3D model. So it's time to boot up Photoshop. In this chapter, we're going to create X-ray compatible textures. Now, you don't have to start with the textures, but I like to, because later, when I work on the model, I have the correct textures already available for export. The individual steps I'll be showing follow closely the steps in Krebs's excellent guide to bump map creation for X-ray Engine. Make sure to get it, as it goes more into details than I can here in the video. So step one is to identify the textures that we have. Now, in more modern texture material sets like PBR or others, you'll have different maps from base color to roughness, metallic, normal. Sometimes there might be others like specular, AO, height, etc. This depends on the texture workflow that the creator used to create those textures. For the first step, we only need to find the base color textures, as this is the one that provides the fundamental coloring for the weapon. You can see here we have a few different base color ones, and we're just going to start with this one here. So I'm going to drag this one to Photoshop. Now you see, that's the base color textures. I will not go deeper into how such a texture is applied to a 3D model, as the basic handling of stuff like UV maps, UV unwrapping, etc. can be found in many Get Started videos on Blender. In our case, it does also not matter, because the creator has set up his models correctly, so all the UV unwrapped stuff is done, so we can just work directly with the textures. Alright, so we're going to save this file as an NVIDIA DDS, because that's what we need as a format for X-ray to work. So for this, I just have save a copy, and here I'm going to choose the, where is it, DDS. Alright, I'm going to use the same folder here, so I'm just going to go up, and then into my prepared folder, game data, textures, weapon, and see, having everything prepared will just save you lots of time. For the naming here, I'm just going to use something like, base. That's fine with me. Maybe, this identifies it well enough. Now, again, there is no naming convention here really, but choosing a name that actually makes sense will make your life just a lot easier later on. So hit save. Now, it's imperative to have the correct settings here, because otherwise it will not render correctly in X-ray. So beginning from the top, here we first are going to choose BC3 with interpolated alpha. Make sure that the image type is a color map, that we have checked to generate MIP maps, and that the filter type here is set to Kaiser. Also that we want to make sure the compression quality is set to highest, so that we have the best possible results. By the way, here is a preview of what it would look like. Naturally, here there's no big change because we have no transparency, nothing, so this is just the way it's going to look. Gonna hit save, and now it has saved that. So if I want to go check out the file quickly, let's go in here. You can see this is now our base DDS file that is stored. So the basic settings that we just used basically are the ones that we're going to use for all the other files we're going to create as well, with the exception of inventory icons, as they don't need bitmaps. So creating the basic color texture was just a warm-up. Now we're going to tackle the more interesting and a bit more difficult stuff as well. Let's have a look at the other files we have here. So this is the first one we've done. So you can see around this this set there is a whole bunch of files here. So if you look at these are all the ones that we have. We don't need this one anymore. These are 5 different texture maps that we have for that set. So we're going to open all of them in Photoshop and have a look at all of them. Now what we're doing here essentially is we're creating a bump map, as it's called in X-ray, or normal map. And here I'd like to cite Krebs's guidelines because it's fantastic. It says, a normal map is a texture that helps making models and textures look better by adding more depth. In the X-ray engine, normal maps also contain information about how lighting should behave on textures. I mean, there's really not much more that can be said about normal maps. So in short, we're now creating an additional layer of information for X-ray so that the gun looks lively and interacts with the ambient light, bouncing back reflections, etc. But what it also does, it gives the gun more depth. It adds scratches, differences in materials, etc. So it really helps making it look more real, if you will. Since I'm going to follow Krebs's guide pretty closely, let's start with some theory first. We need to understand this so that we know what we're doing, even though I'm not going to cover all details. So if you really want to dive more deeply into it, make sure to get his guide and read through it. Let's first have a look at the normal STALKER bump map from another gun, so to understand what we're actually looking at here. Alright, so if you switch to the channel area, as I've done here, you can see that there's this is an RGBA map with 4 channels. There is red, green, blue, and alpha. Now each of those channels fulfill a specific role in the X-ray engine. The red channel here is basically for the glossiness, so that's the reflections that we'll have. It will basically say how shiny your model is. The dark areas indicate less reflection, and the lighter areas more reflection. Pitch black, like here, would essentially mean no reflection at all, and something which is very, very white would basically be shiny like a mirror in a sense. This glossiness map is something that is not present in the normal default maps, but is something that is found in the other ones like specular, metallic, and roughness. The green channel, also called normal Z as the XYZ axis, is practically white. In default normal maps, this is the blue channel. Apparently this will no longer be used in Anomaly 1.6, so we'll see about that. The blue channel is called normal Y. Again, in the XYZ axis, it has a noticeable horizontal orientation of, a visual orientation of things. In the default normal maps, this is the green channel. And finally, the alpha 1 channel or alpha channel is the normal X channel. It has a noticeable vertical orientation of the elements. And in default normal maps, this is the red channel. Now, if you follow closely, then you have noticed that the process of turning a default normal map into an X-ray bump map is basically to create a glossiness map and to rearrange the channels so that it fits what the engine wants. So let's start with the conversion of the normal maps. We've already loaded all the maps that we needed, so I'm going to close this one here. But before starting, something important to note. There are 2 formats of default normal maps, OpenGL and DirectX. For X-ray bump maps, we need DirectX. Luckily, the difference between the two is only that the normal Y, so the green channel, is flipped. Krebs provides a very good side-by-side view of the 2 different formats, so learning to identify which is important, and I have to admit that I struggle with it to this day. It takes practice and a keen eye. Usually try to focus in areas where there is stamped text on your gun, for example, because when it pops out, it's DirectX, and when it goes inwards, it's OpenGL. Luckily, if you got it wrong initially, it's easy to fix later. Sometimes I only realize I got it wrong when I look at the gun in-game, but if you kept all your working files, then it's an easy fix and it just takes a few seconds. Alright, let's recap. We want to build a bump map where we have darker area that reflects less ambient light, and we have lighter areas where we have more light that will be reflected. At this point in time, many of the next steps come down to personal preference. For example, I like my guns to be a bit more dark and matte and not so shiny and having that much reflections, but still keep noticeable scratches and wear on the guns. Again, that's something you might want to do different, but this is really up to your decision. So let's look at the maps we have. In the texture package, we also had one which is the ambient occlusion or AO map, and that's one that we don't need, so we can close that one. Then we have a specular map. As a general note, we should try to work in a non-destructive and versatile way to any digital image. So before we go and mess around with this, we want to make sure that we can revert changes and have a bit more flexibility on that side. So for this, here you can basically right-click on the image and say Convert to Smart Object. This will make it very easy to revert changes and will keep the flexibility as high as we can. Now the first step here is to desaturate this, so to remove the colors, because we only need the grayscale information. Remember, dark is less reflection, light is more. So for this, I just use Ctrl-U, hit the saturation to the very left to completely desaturate. You see, whatever we had before as color is gone. Next up, what I want to do is I want to change the levels of the image. We want high contrast so that our work is actually noticeable in-game. We want the contrast to be much higher here than it might appear later on, but you will see that this will work very well in the bump map. For this, hit Ctrl-L, which is the levels options, and you can see here how the levels of the image are represented. Now this here is the darker ones, this is the lighter ones, so you want to move these sliders until you reach a point where the black basically does not bleed over. So it means that you still have the details, they're not completely gone, but as dark as you can go. And the same thing for light, so you go as light as you can before losing details when the white starts to bleed over. So I think this is quite nice. I like it like this. Again, you can go more extreme if you want. This really depends on your choice and your, let's say, artistic direction in the end. All right. Now, once you're happy with the results, you can keep the image like this for later use. We can already complete the bump map now, but since we have also other maps we can use, let's do that to see if we can get a few more details like scratches, wear, etc. into the bump map. So let's go to the roughness and repeat the steps. But before, I need to point out something important. Depending on the texture workflow that was used by the creator of the model, you might have roughness or glossiness maps. In simple terms, roughness is inverted glossiness. So if you have a roughness map, as here, we first need to invert it to get the map we want to work with. Important also to note is that the desaturation here is not needed as it's already in grayscale. But since we're going to need this later on to be in RGB, we're going to here change this now, the mode to RGB color. All right, let's make it a smart object, let's invert it, and let's start to work on the levels. So let's add a bit more. That looks nice. Perfect. And finally, sometimes you also have a metallic map as we have here. Now you can use it or ignore it. I find it useful to understand what the creator has intended metallic reflections, but depending on the model it can be a bit too drastic. So that really depends on how you want to work with it. Like with the roughness map, we need to invert it first to get the dark areas with little reflection and the light areas with stronger light reflection. Metallic maps usually need a bit less tweaking of the levels, and we also need to ensure the image mode is in RGB color. So we're going to do this first. Like this. We're going to add the smart object. We're going to invert and play with the levels. As you can see, the levels are already quite well. There's not much that I can do here. It's not going to do much. I'm just going to lose a bit of detail, so I'm not going to keep it like this. Now we have 3 glossiness maps that we need to combine before adding it to the bump map that we want to create. So since we created smart objects, we first need to rasterize them, otherwise we cannot combine them. The advantage here is that we can still play with the levels on these if we want as smart objects, but let's assume that we're happy with what we've done. So I do right click, rasterize the layer. I'm going to repeat this in all of them. Right click, rasterize, and we have the spectacular here. Right click, rasterize. Next, let's start, for example, with this one here. We're going to change the channel, and you can see the channels are all identical, of course, because it's grayscale, so there's no difference here. But we're going to use these channels now to paste those other maps that we have created. So for this, let's go to the base roughness. Let's hit Ctrl-A and Ctrl-C to select all, copy all. And then in Spectacular Map, clicking on the red channel, we're just going to paste what we just copied. Repeat with the metallic one. So Ctrl-A, Ctrl-C, and here Ctrl-V, I'm just going to paste it to the green. It doesn't matter where you actually paste it, it just pastes anywhere here. We now still have the information. In the blue channel, the original Spectacular Map. In the green map, the green channel, the metallic map, and in the red channel, we have the roughness map. It really doesn't matter where you paste what. What matters is that in the end, you have this very colorful image here. Now again, what we want to do here, because we need this desaturated, is Ctrl-U. We desaturate completely. And we can do again the levels a bit to adjust some details here if you want to maybe add a bit more light like this, and also the dark side. This is pretty good. You can already tell the gun will be mostly relatively shiny. There's lots of metal on it. The darker areas here are not that many, which is great. That goes well for a pistol, I would say. Once you're happy with the result, let's keep it open in Photoshop, as we will need this to add to the bump map. So let's switch over to the normal map we have here. Upon quick examination, I'd say that it's already DirectX, so no changes needed. But even if it was, you would switch to the channel area here and go to the green channel and simply invert it. Now we're going to build the bump map. For this, on the normal map, we switched to the channels tab and we click on the plus symbol at the bottom here to create an additional channel. Now this, by Photoshop default, will be called Alpha 1. Double click on it, rename it to red. It's not fundamental how you rename them, it's just to understand what we're actually doing. Now go back to the glossiness map, or the spectacular in our case here, and we copy everything we have here. Go back into our normal map and we paste it into red. Now if you remember, this will be the glossiness channel, red. Next, we reconstruct the channel order into proper order for the X-ray bump maps. So we're going to duplicate and rename the old channels. So we're going to start with blue. You're going to right-click, duplicate channel, and rename the new one to green. Then we're going to right-click on the old green channel, duplicate, and rename it to blue. And finally, we're going to right-click on red, duplicate, and rename it to alpha. The name of the channels do not actually matter, but it helps you to see if we've done everything right and if we have a proper red, green, blue, and alpha channel. Next, we need to delete the old channels. So deleting them one after the next. So let's start with the old blue channel, right-click, delete channel. Now, what you can see what happened here is that Photoshop switches to a multi-channel CMY K-color mode and has renamed those into cyan and magenta. Don't worry about it. After we have done deleting all of the stuff, we're just going to go back and switch it to RGB color. So again, this magenta one, I delete it. I delete this cyan one. And now I'm going to go into image, mode, and put it back into RGB color. Now we have built an X-ray capable bump map. Generally speaking, the green areas will reflect less light, ambient light, and the yellow areas will reflect more. Now we saved the file as a DDS using the same settings as we had for the base color. So if you haven't closed Photoshop since, the settings should be still in there. In any case, double check. So save a copy. We're going to put this into the same folder as we were before. And really, for reasons of convenience, what I do is I click on the previous one to just have the name, and then at the end I just add _bump. Now there's no strict naming convention, it just makes it so much easier to later on file your files again. Save. Check if everything is as we want. So BC3 interpolated alpha, color map, MIP maps, Kaiser, highest, and hit save. The flow that I've explained before works in principle for all kinds of maps from any source. However, the maps might look different depending on the source and the texture workflow that was used creating them. So to cite Krebs's, the key is recognizing the appearance of normal Z, Y, X, so to know what to do with the normal map of unknown appearance. This means you need to figure out what each channel represents, and if it's the vertical normal X, or if it's flipped, or maybe if it's just plain empty, and you need to paste some of them in the other maps first. Yes, as with everything X-ray, there's lots of trial and error involved, but once you have it figured out, it's usually relatively quick. Now, before we go into the final step that concludes the X-ray texture workflow, I'd like to point something out. The steps I mentioned before are actually ideal to create automation from. Not the adjust level steps, as these need your intention and also your artistic eye, but everything else can pretty much be set as automated workflows. There's tons of different videos out there to explain how you can create automation, how you can do batch processing, all kinds of stuff like that. In Photoshop, there's the actions, for example. This is what I do in my Photoshop setup. For this example, I'll use my other textures that I have of the P210. So we here did already those, and we had the additional ones of the carry bays. So let's do those. I just drag them all into Photoshop. Okay, first, I've created an action. They're all in here, at the bottom here. That saves the currently open file as a DDS. So here, I'm just going to go to base color, and you can see here I have this one I've saved. I just hit play, and boom, it's done. Essentially, what it does is that it saves the file into proper DDS format and stores it into a folder here that I have defined, and you can see here's my file. So all I need to do now is to pick up the file, go into my texture folder where I have my gun, paste it in here and rename it so that it fits my own naming convention, which is simply just very simple like this. You see, already this probably saved me a few clicks compared to the other process. Another example is merging two maps. As an example, the spectacular one and roughness, or roughness metallic, etc. So here, the first thing I'm going to do to make the example of the roughness map, I'm going to invert it, going to do the levels. This I do manual simply because I'd like to make sure that it does what I want to. This I'm happy with the result. I copy everything. I go to my metallic, and here basically I have created here a step for that. I hit play, it does all the steps. Now let's repeat for this one as well. So here first desaturate, this is the spectacular map. Do the levels. There's not much to gain here still. Like that. I copy everything. I go over here, I hit the action button, done. Third one, as an example, is usually where you can just chain on from this here. I copy everything I have here, where I have all my maps already combined. I can go to my normal map, and here I have just one button, and then it adds everything and creates the bump map like this. Because I have the other already created, I can also just hit here's the save one, boom, and then it has stored this in here in my folder where I have all my exports. So again, I can just go and pick this one up here and drop it here. Again, naming convention that I have internally. I just hit it at bump like that. So you see, you have the whole steps that I've shown before done in a couple of seconds, basically. Now let's go to the final step for textures. For this, you need the XR toolset. In X-ray, each texture has a reference file in the format of THM. These files contain information about which bump needs to be used for a specific texture, the DDS compression used, the actual size in pixels, and the filter type that we use for it. We have two such maps, the base color and the bump, so we need two THM files for them. For this, we just copy such files from any other mod or from the base game itself. As you can see, I've already prepared some here that I copied from somewhere else. There is a third one here with a hashtag that is also a DDS file, and this one is used as a height map. we generally don't use it or don't have it. So in most of the cases, this is just an empty DDS, and that's fine. Now, it would provide corrections to the bump map, but I think most modern texture workflows generate normal maps which are of good enough quality so we don't actually need it. In any case, paste them like I did here in that folder where we have the textures of your gun, and we need to rename them so they fit our maps that we have created here. So in our case, we have already 2 of them, so I'm just going to copy those and duplicate them all. Normally what I do here, which is the quickest way to rename them, is to here copy the file name of the bump map. You can see here, this is the first copy that will go with this one here. So I'm going to rename it. We make sure that the bump is gone, so it has the same file name as the base color map. And for the one here that is the bump, I can paste this, and it needs to have the same file name as the bump map. And then this one here is the same again, but this time with the hashtag at the end. So I'm just going to go like that. So that's the normal set you'll have: base color, THM file, bump, THM file, and bump with the hashtag. So let's do this also for the other one we just created with the workflows. So again here, rename this, rename that one with the hashtag, and rename this one. So now we have properly renamed the files and properly paired them, but the content, of course, of these THM files is not correct yet. So for this, we're going to use the XR toolset THM viewer. So in the XR toolset, you can see it essentially is the one here at the bottom called THM viewer. Now this will open by default in the last folder you had open, so I'm just going to copy here the path, and I'm going to paste it in here. That will be faster. Oops, make sure to paste the whole path like that. And now we're going to choose here to show all maps. So you can see here, it basically shows all the THM files, so all 4 of the files in here. To edit them, all you need to do is to do a right click. So for example, the base one, you do a right click, and you can see this is the content of the THM. Now the stuff that you want to make sure that is the right one here are these entries basically. So in our case here, our base map is a 4K map, so it is 4096 times 4096, so no need to change the texture width and height, otherwise you'd have to change it here. Also the texture format, the DXT5 and the MIP filter Kaiser, this is already set, so normally if you have copied something from the game, this should be fine, but just double check that you have the proper settings here. And finally here, you can see this is the one that edits the base of the color, and the bump mode here says use, so basically means that it uses a bump map to it, and the bump map is the one that is defined here. Now this is the one from the other gun, which is not the right one here. So what we want to do here is make sure that we have the correct one. As you can see, the path here is the same as we have up here. So for this, I can just copy that, put it in here, and then have the name of the bump here. So again, I can copy and paste. The other things here, I leave them untouched. That works like this, so I can just hit accept. And again, to double check the bump here, you can see here again that it has the same settings. Now this is the THM of the bump itself, so naturally it has no additional information on the bump because it is the bump itself, so this can stay just like that. What you need to check here on the bump THM ones is that the texture width and height are correct. So let's repeat the same thing for this one here. Again, we have here a 4K map, so the sizes is fine. We can leave it like this, but we need to change here the folder and the name of the file. So this is P210, and here this one is the carry, so not the base, but carry like this. So make sure that the file name is correct, because that would otherwise not be able to assign this properly. So I hit accept. And I'm going to double check also the other one just to be sure it all looks the way it is. So finally, you can see that it's useful to have set up the folders and everything already, because then you're just quicker in editing and changing all these files accordingly. Next, what I like to do is copy my entire folder structure of the textures into the same folder structure of the SDK. because this will make things easier in the exporting process for the 3D model. So it's not required, but in Blender, I like to work with the textures that I actually see in the finished weapon in the game. So that will just make it nicer for me. What I'll do for this is just gonna grab it here, copy the entire thing, and I have here already prepared the folder, so that's gonna be a bit quicker. I can just paste it in here, and then I have the entire folder set and ready for later. You can see here it's the same folder in my SDK folder structure, so you have all the files in here, and I'm ready, good to go to export. In this chapter, we're going to work mostly in Blender to edit the mesh and set everything up for export. So first thing is to boot up Blender. At this point, I assume you have properly installed the PavelBlend plugin, but if not, download the latest version and other edit preferences add-ons, click install, then find the zip of the plugin, configure all the fields, and you're good to go. Okay, so in Blender, we don't need the default cube, we can get rid of it. We could also get rid of the light, the lamp, and the camera, but we're actually going to keep it because we're going to use it to create the icons later on. So for now, I'm just going to hide my collection here so that this is out of the way. Okay, next let's find a weapon in Stalker that matches the closest, the one we want to create. Of course, you could do everything absolutely from scratch, but that will take a lot longer. Like in my case, I assume other modders are way better at that than me, so let's simply climb on the back of those giants. One of the weapons I really like is the LUN4T1Cs. It has a similar size and mechanical function to the P210, so it will work nicely. And besides, Fire Breath has done a reanimation for it, so we can take advantage of having some of the best animations out there for the gun. Fire Breath, you're a chat, and I stand on the shoulder of a giant. Let's import the OGF files. Go to File, Import, and if the PavelBlend plugin is properly set up, you'll see these things here. So we want to look for the OGF here to import. Naturally, you can put these things also later on a quick action that will of course help save you some time using Blender. All right, so let's do that. Now, what I've already done is I have prepared quickly the folders to upload the stuff. What I'd like to do always when I do these steps is to import the world and the HUD model at the same time. Reason is we're going to save ourselves some steps and some time. Important to understand also what the difference is between the two. The world model is essentially the gun model when it's laying on the floor, on the ground, in-game, and the HUD model is when you have it in your hands. The HUD model has a set of animations to it, but talk about animations a bit later. The world model does not. However, the world model has a collision box so that it's actually not falling through stuff, etc. All right, let's import the LUN4T1. This is the world model. Usually either it says _world, that's what I usually do so I know which one is which one. If it says nothing, that's usually the world model, whereas the other one is labeled HUD. So let's import this one. And at the same time also, let's go and import the other one as well, the HUD model. So OGF, this time go up here. And by the way, in the meshes folder in game data, you usually have these two folders, where in the dynamics folder is where you have the world model, sometimes also all the HUD models as well. You can also store the HUD models somewhere else. It doesn't really matter that much. Important is that you know where they are so that you have the proper path later on in the LTX file. So in this case here, let's go open the HUD model. You can see it says _HUD, so that's the right one. Okay, so we have them here. As you can see, they're not like in the same place or size, but that really doesn't matter, especially for the world model. So here what we're going to do is just going to hide the world model for now. We're not going to work on this at all for now. We're just going to be looking at the other one. Okay, next up, let's import the model we have for the P210. In my case, it's a FBX, so I'm going to choose here import FBX, and I'm going to go same folder where I left it, so it's in here, uploads, and we're going to do the carry. So that's the one we're going to be opening. As you can see, the size is very much different. So the first step really is to bring these two models together so that they have the same size, the same location. What I like to do at this stage is to not work on the bland, let's say, model only, but to change the viewport to the actual textures so that it looks a bit nicer and I actually can see what the textures look like. As you can see here, it looks a bit weird because this one has multiple sets of textures, if you remember. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set the proper textures so that we can see what the gun really is going to be looking like. For that, I'm going to here switch to the shader editor so that you can see here. When I select the parts of the gun, you see here the different maps that are linked to it. All right. As I mentioned, this has multiple sets. So in those sets, there's certain things that are not set and defined, so we can do this ourselves. Metallic is defined, the specular, the roughness, the normal map is not here, and the base color as well is not. So what I'm going to do is to add those so we have a nice looking model here. Quickest thing really for me here is just to go this, click on one, hit Shift D to duplicate, and then here click on the open and choose the right one. So as you can see here, we're talking about the slider. I just clicked randomly on one here. It's the slider. So what we want to have here is we want to find the proper template that goes with it. So here it's called, it's just the P210 specular. So there's no special slider set for it or something. So for that, we're just going to look for the base color, which in this case here, is going to be that one. So we're going to hit open image and we're going to connect this one with base color so that you can see this is now the base color added to the weapon. It looks a bit flat, and the reason for this is that the normal map here is not set. So we're going to repeat what we just did, duplicate, and here add the normal map. This is basically here that one, the carry normal. So open image and connect the normal map, and now this will look much more the way that we want. So you see all the fine structure on it, on the grip here, for example. I think it's a very, very nice model here. All right. And of course, these are the things that we have replicated in the map to some degree. So we're going to see how that's going to look in game later. But we're not done yet. There's this part here that we did, but there's also the other pieces that need the same treatment. And if I here switch to the material properties, you can see that there's two material sets. The carry, the one we've done, and the base is one that we also need to repeat the same step essentially. What I do here, again, I duplicate this one, and I'm going to here to use the base color this time. Link it to here and repeat the steps for the normal map. So here that's base normal, open and connect. All right, now we have the gun all set up the way that we want it to look later on. It's really nice. One of the things I like to do on these maps, especially if they're getting a bit big, is to have here this add-on enabled, this plugin enabled, which helps arrange. So you can just click on the arrange all nodes and it will arrange them nicely in a nice pattern, which makes life a bit easier if you have many of these and want to work with those. But that's not so much a topic right now. Okay, we don't need the shader view for now, so we can look at this. This is what we want to work with. Okay, so I'm going to select all the different mesh objects here. And remember, we need to bring it into the size of the other weapon. So this is where I usually like to start with the different preset viewpoints. So for example, the top viewpoint, I know historically have to look upwards. So here I can choose either the rotate tool or just hit R, which will make me freely rotate it like this on the axis that we have just selected. If you hold down Control at the same time, then it will do this in steps of 5, the rotations. So this is nice to really make sure it's aligned perfectly. And at the top left, you can see the rotation is now 90 degrees, which means that we're on where we want to be and in a nice position. So I click to release the rotation, and now it's there. Now we need to resize it because it's still too big. So this is where I'm going to go on the side viewpoint here to use click on X, and now you can resize with this with the scale, or you can do S, and with S it's something similar, so it resizes like that. You see, don't go too far, otherwise you flip it the other direction. So we just want to resize it roughly and then zoom a bit in, and we're going to go into the details in a minute. At this point, there's a few things you can do to just help a bit resizing or moving stuff around. So one of the things I like to do, for example, is to try and place the trigger pretty close to each other. So it's still a bit big. I'll make it a bit smaller. Like that. So you can see here the trigger is placed roughly like that. It's not so bad. And now I'm here going to place the 3D cursor on the point that I have chosen to be kind of my reference point for this resizing, and then switching here the pivot point to the 3D cursor. And now when I scale it, it will scale on that point. So this will make my life a lot easier to really make sure that the size is well made, that the trigger guard is more or less the same size, and also the piece where the character is going to hold it, his hands, is also nice, the same size, because this is going to be noticeable in game if the weapon is way too big or way too small. But I'm quite happy. I think the weapon is well placed. Even the barrel is more or less on the same side and the same spot. So I think that's good so far. If it looks crappy in game, I can always change it later and go back here and edit the bit a little bit. So this is always good to keep your Blender files as they are as well, so that you can edit later on. Actually, it's maybe a little bit big. I want to make it a little smaller. All right. Okay. That's pretty good. Let's look from the top. If we are well, yeah. So we are not exactly in the middle. So I'm going to adjust it a little bit. By the way, when you can hit keep control push down, you can also do the same with shift, and with shift you can do much smaller movements so that you can really make sure to place it as perfectly as you can. Okay, I'm quite happy with where it's placed now on top of the other gun. So what I'll do here, I'll just create a new collection quickly. I'm going to put all of these in my new collection. Makes it a lot easier to just manage the gun. Something else that we will do later on is to, of course, make the texture maps in a way that can actually be exported for Stalker. But I want to keep it right now in this, let's say, more high quality view in Blender, because I want to use that later on for a render that I can then make icons out of. Also, I like to work with things that look nice, so this is why I leave it like this for now. We will do those steps at the end, but that's something that will come later. For now, let's have a look at how does such a model actually work in game. If you look at the model, then it consists of different components. Think of it like this. The textures of it, this is what you see here of the 421. It's like the skin of a model. The mesh is like the meat, and the bones, well, the bones are the bones. So, of course, a bone in an actor model is much more equivalent to real bones. Here, really, the bones are the things that will move the model and the components in the game. So it means that we essentially need to attach the mesh to bones so that when the animation is moving bones around, the meshes are moving with the bones. How that works is essentially through, I'm just going to move the model a bit, is essentially through vertex groups. Okay, so the mesh itself is split into vertices, and those you're going to assign to a certain vertex group, and each vertex group, like here slide for example, is the equivalent of one of the bones that is also called slide. And it's important that they are called the same, because if there's a mismatch, then the engine will not know what to do with your vertex group. You won't even be able to export it properly, and the gun will just not work. So this is where it's really important that the names are respected, really. So what I usually do is just copy paste them so that I don't retype them, then I can just avoid typos. Now let's see more in details what this means. Right? So if we look at this piece here, for example, that's the silencer. All right, so you can see in yellow highlighted is the silencer piece of the gun. The silencer here is also the vertex group. It has nothing else than that. So usually this just means that when in-game I mount the silencer, then this is visible. And if in-game I remove it, then the silencer is gone. It's not there anymore. Now for our gun, we don't actually have silencer in the model. So we could of course add them, but I'm not going to add them now. That will be something for a different video where we'll be talking about adding scopes and silencers and laser aiming modules and grenade launchers and all the fun stuff. For now, let's just do the basics and having actually a pistol that we can export. Good. Then looking here at this is really the rest of the gun where all the different components are. And we want to here look a bit at the details, what these components, how they're called, what they do, and what they look like. So first, we usually have something like a weapon body or body, which is the largest part of a weapon normally. Especially in the rifle, this is going to be most of the gun is going to be part of the weapon body bone, and this is usually one that does not move individually of the other ones. It moves as a whole. So if we want to see which parts of the gun is assigned to the weapon body, we need to switch the view from object mode to edit mode. When we go to edit mode, we essentially see the individual vertices of the gun. So each of these dots is a vertex, and together they build, they define the gun, and they have the texture attached on it. So what we can do here is we can, for example, select here the weapon body vertex group, and we can click on select, and now this will select all the vertices that are assigned to that group. In essence, what we're going to do with our model, the P210, is the other way around. We're going to select the vertices and assign them to the weapon body so that we then basically have all of that in there. All right, I can hit H to hide them. I'm going to do that now so that I can see the rest of the gun. And by the way, it's not lost, it's just hidden. So with Alt H, I can just bring it back, and with H, I can hide it again. Now let's look at the hammer piece. Select again, this is pretty obvious, that's the hammer. We're gonna hide that. We have a mag release button here, nice, I'm gonna hide it. We have the magazine itself, that's this piece here. I'll talk a bit more about that later, but let's hide it for now. Then we have bullet 1, which is the one that is more the first one in the magazine, and we have bullet 2, which is the next one. We have the muzzle, which here is this whole piece. Now, sometimes the muzzle is not actually or there's no vertices basically assigned to the muzzle. Sometimes they do. It depends if the animation is needing or is moving the muzzle, then it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, usually it's not actually has any vertices assigned to it. Here it's the case, so we're going to replicate that as well in our model. Let's hide it. Then we have shell. So shell usually is an empty bullet that is hidden somewhere in the gun, and that is going to be ejected, or that is used for jamming animations, etc. So this is normally something that is hidden in the gun somewhere, but it has some. It's usually needed for some cool animations that in the game. So I'm going to hide it as well. There's the slide, of course. That's this whole big piece here. So I'm going to hide that. There's the slide lock, that's this piece, and finally the trigger, this one. Okay, so we have the whole gun detailed, open back up, that we're going to replicate all of this in our model. Now, our model is more likely not going to have any bullets or shell in it. Sometimes models do have that, sometimes they don't. So this is where we're going to see if we just need to copy some from here over or not. Now, one of the things you can do to save yourself some time is, for example, to keep this thing like that, and then just delete all the things not needed, and keep those that you want to reuse in your own weapon. Just keep in mind, if you do stuff like that, if you do reuse components like bullets, for example, then make sure that it's either components from the base game so that everybody has them in the game. And if not, then you need to make sure to provide the textures for it and everything in all the texture files. Otherwise, people will have missing textures. Or, like in this case, if you take them from another mod, you can also just write that this mod is a requirement for yours. I usually don't do that because I don't like to make mods requirements of other mods. So if I can, I provide the textures and I credit the author of them and say, Fire Breath, thanks a lot for providing all of these cool assets. I'm going to use them, reuse them in my gun. And I can invite also people to, of course, use his mods, for example, so that they don't need these textures, but if they have just a duplicate, it doesn't really hurt. All right. So let's have a look at what we have now. So I'm going to go back into the object mode, and I'm going to for now just hide the fort, and I'm going to reopen our P10. Okay, so the P10 you see here is made up of more elements than the 421, simply because this has been already reduced a little bit for export. So some of these are going to be easy to assign, like for example the trigger. So that's a bit of a no-brainer. Same here for the slide release. Actually, I guess that's slide release. But some others, maybe we need to go a bit into details to see if we need to split some of the components to make it work. So let's start with the simple stuff. So I think we can all agree this is the slide. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to either, copy it from here, or what I can also do is go here and copy it from here. So let's do that. I'm going to here, just double click, Control C, and here in my slide, where was I? Here, I'm going to click on plus to add a new vertex group. And when I keep the mouse on it, I can just hit Control V, and it will then replace what I just copied before. Next step is I need to switch into the edit mode. I can do this by clicking here or with Tab. And normally everything is pre-selected, but I can also, just to be safe, in case I clicked and unselected something, just hit A, which will select all the vertices. And then all I need to do is hit assign, and now they're assigned to the slide. Depending on how you want it to work, what I like to do is to kind of hide the stuff that I have done, so it's out of the way, it's done, I don't need to look at them anymore. Oh, looky here, we even have bullets in this model, fantastic. So we can work with those. Maybe we'll need to take one apart to create a shell. Let's see about that later. Good. Slide release, we have it here. So remember, we had the slide release. Where was it? Actually called slide lock here, which is absolutely fine. So I copy that. I go back to my slide release here. Click plus, paste, tab, assign, tab, H. I'm going to basically repeat the steps with all the other elements we have in here. Completed assigning all the vertices. I just save you guys some time to watch all the different steps, but there's one thing I noticed if I look at the weapon is the hammer. So the default position here is the hammer is actually closed or up. However, in our reference model, so in the fort, the hammer is down. So we're going to replicate this because we want to make sure that the model is exactly the same, so that we don't have any issues with animations. Because if the animation wants the hammer to start at the bottom and ours starts at the top, then it will go all the way into the gun when it moves in game. So that's what we want to avoid. So how to move that? Again, I prefer one of the orthogonal views. Here, in this case, it is the X view. I'm going to put my model above it again. I'm going to select the hammer, and you can see here I want to bring it down to this position. Now, this side is maybe not so ideal, and what we can do, of course, is hide the stuff that is in the way. Let's quickly hide this one for now. Let's see if this is also maybe not that helpful. Maybe this one, that's better. So we can see more or less where the hammer is, how it works. The other thing that we can do here is to make sure that we work with the 3D cursor, so that we rotate around the 3D cursor and not somewhere freely. I don't know exactly where the pin is, but I'm assuming that it's probably here. So I'm just going to try it like that. And now I'm going to bring back the reference model. This is still selected. The 3D cursor is set here where I think it will pivot. And I need to check that the 3D cursor is set as the pivot point. Then I can choose the rotate one, and or I can just hit R. And when I rotate this, you see it rotates around this axis, and I can really place it nicely like this, same position as the other hammer, so that I know when the game will actually then make the hammer move, it will move the right way and the way it's expected. Oh, as you can see here, one thing I could have done, and I'm going to undo this quickly, is that I just realized that there is actually here a texture that indicates where the pivot point is. And you see, if I did not find the right way. So I'm going to here play with the different viewports. This is not going to help. This net's okay. So I'm going to stay with this one here. And I'm just going to place this one the best I can here in the middle. Again, this is not rocket science. This is not nanoscience. You just need to make it in a way that you're happy with the result. So that's the most important bit. Okay, move the hammer again. Yes, this is much, much better. Right, again here, rotation you can do with shift to place it as precisely as you can. And now that's very nice. It's gonna work exactly the way that the railgun does, because we have a very nice model here. The model here from Akinaro in general, the models from Akinaro are very, very, very good. They're very well done. They're very detailed, and they're just fantastic for Stalker, really. What was interesting was when I took the model apart is that actually we do have a shell here, which is really cool. So we don't need to do that. We have bullets, 2 of them. So it's actually pretty much a perfect fit for our weapon. One of the things though that I need to show, because that's exactly the type of things that you will do when you mod weapons, is that you remember how we had in the 421 the muzzle being its individual piece. So let's quickly do it like that. So as you can see here, that's the gun again. If you go into the details and I hide the body and the slide, remember we had this piece here, which is the muzzle. Okay, so that's essentially something that we need to replicate in our model, because in our model the whole body and the barrel is essentially one piece, and we need to now assign these individual vertices to the muzzle. So for that, I'm going to copy again here the name. I'm going to leave this model and go back to our P210. So selecting this one here, switching over to the edit mode, and you can see that this is all the vertices that exist. I've already assigned them to weapon body, but now I'm going to create an additional group for the muzzle. So next thing is to assign the proper vertices to the muzzle group. Now, the quickest way to do that is, if the model has been well made, is to, with your mouse, point on one of the vertices and then hit L, which will select all the linked vertices like this. So we're in luck, the model is very well done, so I can do this and it will just fit perfectly. Now I assign these to muzzle, and because I had them previously assigned to body, I click on body and I remove them from body. Now let's quickly double check. So select body is everything else. If I hide that, then what is left here is the muzzle, and it looks fine. Now, interesting what we have here is that we have additional components, and I'm going to quickly do it like that and just hide all of that stuff. We have these springs inside, okay? Now, they're probably not visible in game at all, but this is where I'd like to, be a perfectionist, and I'm actually going to add them to the muzzle. So in case there's a cool animation that sometimes moves the muzzle, then we have these springs actually moving alongside, because they really, belong together. Now, not all of them, because that's the gas tube. So there's one piece that moves and the rest that does not. So again, it's not going to be visible. I'm not going to exaggerate here, go too much into crazy details, but I'm going to look at what we can do here so that this is something nice then in game. So as one piece, for example, I will for sure select the gas tube here, and I will assign it to the muzzle group and remove it from the body group. Hide it so I see better what is left, and I will do the same spring. Strictly speaking, the spring, of course, would not move. It will, of course, compress. That's something that we could do in animations, but we're not going to cover in this video. So again here, remove from body, assign to muzzle. So let's quickly show everything again. Let's see what we've done. So body, select, hide, and what we have left is the muzzle. Select, okay, looks good, perfect. Curious to see how that does then later on in game, but we'll see. So we're almost done with assigning all the vertices, where I noticed something interesting. That is, there's a piece of the gun. So here, for example, this is the slider. All right, so the slider is a thing that when you shoot, moves backwards. Boom, loads a new gun. Boom, moves like this. Okay. Control Z to bring it back up. I'm gonna hide that. In this part here, we have already assigned the barrel piece to the muzzle group. But what we have below here is we actually have the spring and the piece here that is attached to the slider that moves backwards when shooting. So this is essentially, you know, how the gas tube works. So to bring the slider back and back to the front. So the thing is, we could just completely ignore that as it's probably not going to be visible in game. But since we have these things, let's assign them properly so that they actually work in game. So for this, we're going to assign the springs and the components here to the slider. That is going to be the piece that is going to be moving with the gun. So for this, first we're going to go grab the sliders name of the group here, back, and add additional group for the slider or the slide, and now in here switch to the edit mode so that we can see the components that we have. So let's first, where is it here, remove everything so that we can really start from scratch. And then here we had some more, so it's also going to remove this from everything that we have. Okay, so using the L button, I can again select these pieces here that I know I can already assign them to the weapon body, so this is safe. So here, assign, hide, they're gone, that's fine. We have a button here, assign this one as well, hide something else on the other side. What helps if you're working in these details is to isolate what you're working on, and for this you can hit the tilde key on the top left of the keyboard, which will hide everything else except for the piece you're working on, which, you know, it really helps if you're in details here with vertices like I do now. So I'm going to assign this one as well. By the way, hitting tilde key will bring everything back again, right? So. And now we want this piece at the top here that is part of the muzzle group, like this, so we can hide it. And now this is the part that's interesting because that's the part that's going to be moving. I mean, essentially it's the ring here with the spring that is going to move. Now, the spring is going to compress and not actually move. So this is where we need to find some kind of middle ground, because if we move the whole spring entirely, it might actually move into an area where it's visible. So if you remember, we have the rest of the gun back here. So if I would here select the whole spring, and if I would move the whole spring, you might actually get into something that is visible. So maybe we don't want to do that. What we can do instead is just have one part of it that we will use. But first, let's see if we can properly isolate this little ring here. With L doesn't work, so we have to do this one by one. So that is the part that is going to move with the slide, whereas the rest is going to stay as the rest is the gas tube. There's different ways on how you can go about selecting these things. One way is just to use a select square like that, for example, and then you see these are selected. What you can also do is here switch to a different face select, for example, here to a different select, the face select, for example, which will select the entire face, which sometimes just is a bit more efficient. So you can flip it around, hold shift down, then you can add this to your selection. You see, I haven't selected everything, it doesn't matter. I'm going to start with this. I'm going to assign this to the weapon body piece and just hit H to hide, repeat with those that I missed before. Assign, hide. You see there's a bit more here, small pieces, make sure to grab them all, hide. Sometimes it's also good to switch back to the individual vertex mode to see if there's not one floating around that you've missed. And now we're getting closer here. Okay, so I want to make sure to select this here and not too much. So one thing that we can do is we can first of all, I'm going to here just hide the spring so it's not in the way. We can work our way either backwards from the barrel piece or directly from here. So that really depends on how you want to do about this. So I'm going to start with this one here directly. It's not that many vertices, so it's going to be relatively quick. So again, select, I'm going to add them to the slide, and then hide. Select, assign, hide. That's already done. And now I need to check here. I'm going to do this with those around here first. Assign, hide, assign, hide. Repeat this with the ones here at the bottom. Assign, hide, and this one too. Now here I need to check how many. Yeah, I think it's fine if we leave it like this. Okay, then the rest we have, I just select everything, assign this to body, and then we should be good to go. So we can do a little test here. So let's select only the slide piece. Of course, I haven't done the spring yet, but I will do the spring later. Let's first hide all of this here so that we have a better view on things. Let's go into the focus view as well. Let's select then the slide piece and let's see how that does if we move it around. You see, we have missed a few, and that will of course not look that great in game. So this is where we need to make sure that we have selected everything that is part of this ring here, and that we didn't miss any of those. So as you can see here, it has there's also a few of the couple on the front that is selected and the back. So I'm going to go into details here, fix all of this, and then I will continue with the spring afterwards. So that took some time to fix all the details, but now we have nicely the individual pieces separate the way we want. So we have the body here, we have the muzzle, just this piece here, the barrel, plus the gas tube, and we have the slide now, which is all of this. So basically the way I've done it, I've also selected half of the spring to be part of the slide so that this piece moves without going into a visible part of the gun. Okay, so next up we need to now make this part of the actual gun's armature. So for that we have here the 421 armature. I'm just going to copy this one like this. So we have the armature over here. I'm also going to rename it. It's not really needed, but it's nice to see it in game, which one is the in Blender, which one is the right name. So it makes it a bit easier for later on to handle the files. Next up, I'm going to parent all of these. So select them all. I'm holding shift down, drop, and now they're all part of this. They're all inside this armature, and now I need to also assign here a modifier armature so that they actually will, move with the bones. So for this, hit armature, select our P210, and that's basically repeat for all of those. Now, if any one of you knows a quicker way to assign armatures automatically to a bunch of objects, then let me know. I haven't found a better way, so I'll be very, very grateful for any help to just speed up such processes. I mean, here we have more than a dozen. That's relatively quick, but sometimes in very large guns, or let's say guns with lots and lots of objects, then this can take a while. So if there's any way to make this quicker, I'll be more than happy to learn. Good, so now that's done. Let's quickly double check we've put the right one everywhere to avoid errors in exporting. That looks good. Okay, so you see here the name of the bones here is still 4. That doesn't matter, it's really just the armature that we care about at this point in time here. So we're almost there, almost ready to export. A few things we still need to look into more details, but first things first, let's have a look at the actual armature and where the individual components, what these are and what they do. For this, I'm going to here click on the armature, hit tab to switch into the edit mode so that we can actually have a look at the different bones that we have. Now, normally it's always, the best thing is always to not touch bones and not move bones around, because that will most likely mess up animations afterwards. But sometimes you have a situation where you will need to move a bone like a muzzle, that it's actually where the muzzle is. Now in our case here, it's pretty well set. It's I know, a few millimeters off, so I'm not going to touch that. That's absolutely fine. But sometimes when you have a rifle, you use an armature from a different rifle, and it's much shorter or much longer. You don't want the flash to be inside or outside of the rifle. You want the muzzle flash to be, well, on the muzzle. So there it makes sense to, you know, relocate the muzzle here to actually fit where your muzzle is. So how you would do that is I would go into an orthogonal view, for example X. I selected here the muzzle. I go to move, and then I move this here on top of the actual barrel ending. So I've done it like this. This is fine. So I'm happy with this. I'm going to go back into the object mode. Good. So next up, what we need to do is, since you remember, we do have bullets in here, which is really great. But we need to make sure that the bullets are at the proper spot, otherwise they will animate weirdly. So the ones in the magazine, I would assume that they're probably fine because they're in the magazine. And if you look at our reference model here, then it's going to the edit mode here. Let's see. Let's first off show everything, and let's hide the body part. So let's also hide the magazine for now. Let's also hide the slide lock, the trigger. We don't need any of these. Yeah, so the bullets are fine. They're in the magazine. It's the right spot. However, the shell is up here in the barrel. So I'm assuming here this is for animation, where basically the shell retracts with the barrel and then ejects. So we want to do the same thing. So we're going to move our shell also into the barrel on our model. So for that, I'm going to hide this one again, back into our model here. I'm going to first show them all, and now I'm going to hide individual components to see. I've hidden the barrel now. Let's simply hide the slide. Okay, that's better. Yes, so that makes sense. I'm going to put it in here. So where's my shell? This is the empty bullet here. So that's the empty case. Okay, so here again, I'm going to use the UI orthogonal view, so that makes it a lot easier to actually properly place it. Again, with Shift, I can make sure that we're somewhere exactly where we want to be. What also makes sense is to go flip the view into the other direction. It looks, I think I've hit it pretty well. You can also here change, for example, to this view here, where you see really the detailed grid of the mesh. And yeah, I mean, it's probably not absolutely 100% perfect, but almost. Good. That's good enough for me now. So this is placed nicely. Now what I want to check is also from a left-right point of view if it's in the right spot. So here I'm going to switch to this view here, and let's select the shell. Let's see where it is. I need to hide the muzzle as well, so that we can actually see the shell. I think I might have hidden it before. Okay. So select. I'm going to invert the selection, hide everything else, so that I have it nicely here. And now let's see where we have it. Okay, it's up here. Okay, that's pretty good. So this, you can see the other shell that we have, and this one is here because the 421's barrel is a bit higher up, so this is where it's up here, but this is absolutely fine, and this will look great in game, I would say. Okay, perfect. So let's get ready to export then. So remember that we tweaked a bit with the textures to make them look nice at the very beginning. So what I'm going to do here, because I still want to keep our nicely shaded textures for rendering a nice image that I can then use for the icons, I'm just going to here create an additional collection, and I'm just going to copy all of these into my other collection up here that just created. Where did it go? Here. Since I've already assign them all an armature, it will also copy the armature. So I could have saved a step here if I was smarter. So I'm just going to delete this one because I don't need it. So that's going to be for my icons. I'm just going to call this the render or whatever. Yeah, well, like this. Then I'm going to hide it because I don't need that at all. This is for later. And here on my current model, this is where I'm going to change now the texture so that this will actually work for export. Remember, we created textures. We created the diffuse texture and the bump maps. The bump map's not going to be important for the export. That's going to be something that is only in game. But here we have all these others like metallic and specular and all of this. I'm going to remove all of these maps because we don't need them for export. We only need the base color that we're going to replace with the one that we've created. So for this, it's usually good to be here on the material tab so you know what you're doing. So we're going to start with the base. And since they all reference the same base, I just need to change it once. It will be changed everywhere at the same time. So the base here, I'm going to delete all of these. Just select them, delete them. And here I'm going to select a new one, which is the one that we have in our SDK folder. So there we go. That was base, so I select base. You can see here there's the bump and the bump with the hashtag. So, but this is the one we want, the base. Let's hit open, and also connect the alpha here, since we're having this as part of the texture. Of course, this looks different now because it does not have all the nice shading in normal map, but don't worry about it. This is just for the export. So we repeat the same thing for the carry. So we delete everything we don't need here. Connect this quick with alpha, open, and here's the carry. Add that one. All right, so this is the way it will look when we export it. I know, a bit bland, but that's okay. You can see that it did it everywhere, obviously, because it's the same texture set that is referenced. One more thing we need to do is to make sure that here in the X-ray engine piece, that the correct shaders in material is selected. So the easiest way to do that is to click on one of the reference gun that you have. You can see here the shader is model, materials default objects. I'm just going to copy the default object bit, and here I'm going to paste this. Model's already in, sometimes something else, so just make sure this matches something you have from X-ray, and then you're good to go. Same thing here, like this. Wonderful. Now that we have set this, there's only one last piece to check, and this is that we do have here the proper UV map set. And you can see here the UV maps is something which if they're all the same, it's fine, but what I like to do here is just go into one of the references and copy the name of it, and then in here basically repeat that for every one of them to make sure that they all have the same one. This will just avoid any problems or will help you avoid any problems that you might have. Important is that you have only a singular UV map set, and ideally it's the texture one, then you're be sure everything will be fine. So having a last quick check, this all looks fine. So we're good to export. So next thing here is file. So you have to select the HUD, the armature here. That's important, the HUD one. Then hit file, export, OGF, and then the OGF file goes into the folder we talked about before. So I already prepared the folder here. So you can see here in a folder structure, game data meshes, anomaly weapons. I have here my folder. We'll be talking about folder structure a bit more later. So this is just you see how the export works. That folder, hit export. It's done. It's a very simple, quick, small mesh. So there's no big thing to export. So that was a quick one. Now let's export also the world model. It's going to here. We're going to do this pretty quickly. So for that, I'm going to first hide all of that, and then we're going to look at the world model here that we have from the fort. So I'm going to duplicate this the armature. I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to rename it P210. And what I like to do here is just say underscore world, so I know that this is the world model. You can also just call it any other way you want, but this makes it a little bit easier for me. Next up, let's copy everything we had here, our model that we have in the HUD, over to the world model armature. So for this, I copy all of that, I paste it. And actually, because they all have the armature modifier, it's copied the whole armature, but I don't need that one, so I can just delete this, the copy. And I'm going to hide all of this, so it's a bit out of our way. Now you can see you have basically here all those the whole model objects, and I'm going to parent them again, holding shift, dropping, and they're inside. Next, since this is a world model, we're going to simplify things a little bit here. I'm going to select all the object and hit Ctrl J to join them all into one singular object. And also because we don't have any variable components like a silencer or a scope, we can actually parent all of these just to one single vertex group, which is the weapon body. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove all the other ones like that, and then here hit Tab to go into the edit mode, select all with hitting A, and then assign them all to weapon body. That of course will just make it a bit easier and a bit quicker to work with. If I look here at the world model, you can see here also in terms of the bones that the names are slightly different because this was probably done using another world model. So for us, it just avoids any problems that we might have with namings of bones if we just assign everything to the weapon body. Apologies, this one is the one I meant. The reason why this simplification is important as well is because the world HUD usually is a bit reduced, and if we look at the world HUD of the 4th here, you can actually see in terms of bones, it only has the silencer, the magazine, and the body. So all the other ones that we assigned before, like slider and lock and trigger, they would basically create an error message because they don't exist here. So world model reducing it to body is usually a safe choice, let's say. Now let's resize it a bit to fit the other one as well. It's not really crucial, but I think it's a quick thing to do. So let's place it here. Let's resize it nicely. Again, this here does not need to be super accurate. It's a thing that's going to be laying on the floor, but I want to make sure that it has more or less the correct size compared to other weapons, of course. So if it would be much larger, much smaller, that would be a bit odd. Good, that looks very nice now. We don't need to touch the textures. We've done all of this already in the HUD model. So all we need to do now is make sure that the armature is properly selected here. So the world armature, and then we can click on world and we can export. Going to file, export, OGF, and this time we're going to go into the other mesh folder, so not the anomaly weapon where we put all the HUD information, but in the dynamics one, weapons P210, and export here. Good, so the weapon is all good and ready now for to use in-game. We have created the world model, we have created the HUD model, so what's next is to create nice icons, and then in the end, the last step is to configure the LTX file so that all of this thing actually comes to life in-game. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about icons. Now, I need to admit that my solution to create icons is okay. It's fine with me. I'm sure there are better ways out there, and I would be really happy if anybody who knows better ways to do icons would tell me, because I feel like that's one of the things that I could really improve on my guns. So please feel free to comment or send me a message if you have a better way of doing icons. So you remember that a little while ago we created an additional collection here where we stored, that we called rendered, where we stored the, let's say, beautiful view of the gun with all the shaders and everything enabled on it. So we're going to use this as a base to create an icon. So you also remember that we kept the camera in the light, and we're going to use the camera and the light to render a nice scene so that we can have the gun. Now for this we need to place the camera in an orthogonal view. We need to place the light, the lamps correctly, and all of this. Because I'm basically a lazy person, I have done that once, and then I have stored another Blender file with exactly my setup that I like. Again, it's by far not the perfect setup, but I find it relatively nice and flexible. So I'm just going to basically copy that into my other file here, so that I don't need to redo it for this camera. But in essence, I will show you very quickly what you need to change and adapt to make it work like this. So I'm going to copy paste that here. As you can see, it is set and prepared. This is basically the screen of the camera, if you will, of what you're going to be seeing on screen. These are two lamps that are going to light our little scene here. But first we need to prepare something for this, because when I would render this now, it would render everything we have in here, and I want to make sure that it doesn't render all the other stuff that we have done. There's different ways to go about that. The easiest one is just to here remove the little symbol here. So I'll click on the symbol so that these are all removed from renders. This has no influence on exporting the gun or anything else. This is really just for the renders. Same thing here. Here I can do it on the entire collection, so everything inside is excluded. Of course, the camera we want to keep in render, and this one as well. So if we render now, we'll only get whatever is in this collection, plus, well, the camera and the lights that create the render. Important here, if you want to have a render in Stalker that is a kind of an orthogonal view from the gun pointing to the right, then you want to also make sure the render here works like this. As you can see, the gun is the normal size of the gun, but for the render we can actually make it a bit larger, because then we will have a nicer resolution and we can maybe tinker a bit more with details. So for this, I'm just going to select everything, orthogonal view, S for scaling, and then I'm going to scale this up a little bit like that, maybe move it around. Again, we're here moving around the gun that we have prepared for render, and not the one that we have as part of the HUD, for example. That looks pretty nice. Now, the important bit here is you can also here click on the viewport shading, so you already can see what the render will look like, how the light reacts on the gun. I think that's relatively nice. And one final thing to do is to properly set up here the environment so that the background is transparent. So for this here, open the film bit and click on transparent. This will save you probably lots of hours in Photoshop in cutting out your gun and stuff. All right, render looks nice so far. Hitting F12 will render the scene. This is what the gun looks like rendered. Maybe we have a bit too much light here on the metallic bit. This could look a bit too white. So maybe here what we can do is take the one here, these two lights, for example, that are on the sides, and just move them out a little bit more so that they produce less light on that component. Let's hit F12 again. Maybe now it's a bit too dark, so I'm going to move these back. So you can see you'll be playing around with these things a little bit until you get a nice render the way you wanted it. There's probably no 100% best way to do it, but this looks quite nice for now. So I'm going to keep it like this. I'm going to here go to Image, Save As, which will basically here let me save the image as a high resolution PNG. So I'm saving it now, like this, and the next steps are in Photoshop. I've been running around the zone like an idiot. I now need an energy drink. Much better. Good, Photoshop. So let's create that icon now. And what really helps here is to have a nice template you can reuse for all your weapons. Also, in the same weapon set, if there's multiples, it really helps to make your life a lot easier. So for this, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to make sure it's 2048 x 2048 resolution. You can put to whatever you want. The reason is that this is the size it needs, minimal size it needs to work on non-DX11 setup. So if someone is DX8 or 9, then they need this size, otherwise the icons will look weird in game. I'm not sure exactly why. Someone told me once that that's the case, and since I never had the issue anymore, so this is what I do. Next up, what helps also is to bring a grid into this file, a 50 by 50 pixel grid, because 50 by 50 pixel is the XY unit used then in LTX, for example, to place the icons. So it helps really to have this grid so that you know where stuff is. So for this, view, guides, new guide layout. Since 2040, 8 divided by 50 is roughly 40. This is have 40 columns, 40 rows, 50 pixels, and then I have a nice grid. Now, essentially, if something is in a grid like this, basically that's location 0, 0, that's location 1, 0, that's location 0, 1, etc. So this is where we're going to place our gun now. Now we have stored our weapon here. Where is it? Here it is. So I'm going to drag this into Photoshop. Now obviously this is going to be way too big now, but what we just do is we copy this over into this one here, and now we're going to resize it. Now it's a pistol, so it's not going to be very, very big, so I know we want to avoid making it anything large, higher than 1. So you can see here it's a bit wider than just a single field. Now 1, 1 would be very small, so this is absolutely okay like that. I usually tend to not center them. I just leave them aligned to the left. I guess here you can do it the way you want. I prefer it like this because in case I would at some point maybe have a silencer, this buys me a bit of space to properly place a silencer as well. So accept, this is where it's placed now. Next thing is, and this is something where different people might do it differently, I like to add a soft Gaussian blur behind it so that it just looks nice in the inventory. For that, I just hit select all, just move it a bit, create a new layer, fill that layer with black, and then here apply some blur, Gaussian blur. 2 pixels is maybe a bit much for a small gun, maybe 1.4, something is nice like this. And I move the other layer on the top, and now we basically have our nice Gaussian blur behind the gun. As you can see, this is above, this is behind. It doesn't look like much, but it does this small difference in game. Naturally, this is lots of wasted space here. That's true. That's how things are. All right. If you want to make sure that it's compatible for the X8 and 9, that's kind of what you need to do. Now, since we plan to make variations of this gun anyways with the different colors, and there's also that's the carry, then there's also the target. So we're going to use a bit more room than eventually with the other variations here, but still most of it will just be white. It's how things are. Next up, we're going to save this in a format that is actually usable, so it's a DDS format for X-ray. For that, I just do a file, save as a copy, navigate to my folder. As you can see, I've prepared the folders already, so I put this into game data textures, UI, give it a nice name, like UI underscore P210, for example. Choose DDS as a file format, and hit save. Now, here, it's important to choose the right settings. So as always, we go for the BC3 interpolated alpha. The bitmap option here, you would normally set to Kaiser, but here we don't need bitmaps because this is just an icon file, so we can uncheck this one here. Still, we keep the highest compression quality, so the file will be 4 megabytes, and that's fine. So we hit save, and that's all we need to do. Basically, the icon is done now. If we navigate to our folder, you can see that we now in here have a nice icon that we can use. Of course, don't see much because it's very small, but this is the one that we're going to have in game. Next up, we're going to have to edit and configure the LTX so that we can actually use the gun in game. This comes in 2 parts. One is editing the LTX itself, and the other one is making sure that we have all the textures, components, files, and everything that we need in the proper folders with the proper naming, so that the build will actually work. to start working on the LTX file, I always recommend to start with the original file that we're basing this off. So in our case, that is the fort. So I've already opened the fort here in Notepad++, which is really what I can recommend as the best Notepad tool out there. At least it is for me. So you can see here, this is the full LTX. Now we're going to do some changes to that, and we're going to make some adjustments to it. But first of all, we're going to just copy that file over into our folder of our gun, so that we can, have basically the original here, and at the same time, in parallel, the other ones, so that we can compare them side by side. So for this, let's go in here. Let's go grab the original file. Copy. And now we need to create a folder here to put the gun in. So that's weapons. There we go. Okay, we renamed this also to our new name, so that's 210. Maybe we're gonna call this Sig 210 because potentially there might be other weapons that call P210, I don't know, but at least this will put us in the safe zone. Okay, so now we see these two files are identical. It's just that this one is going to be the one that we're going to modify. So looking through the file here, we can see that, well, there is a basic, the base here of the gun, and it has a few variations. You see the base is using 9x18 ammunition, but there's a variation here of the 417 that we don't actually need. So I'm just going to delete everything 417 related. All of this can go, because we built it off the 421, which is the Fort Snag version. This is basically what we need here. Now we need to check here a little bit, because this is, let's say, a composed LTX that has a base weapon and another one, and we don't want to have everything duplicated. So we're going to have to work a little bit on this detail here to make sure that we have everything the way that we want it. So if we start at the top, I'm not going to go into every single line here, obviously, but I'm going to, capture a few of the more important bits. So first, what really helps is to replace things like this in the whole document, so that you can, save yourself some pain here. So for that, I just use Ctrl-H, which I know is find this and replace with something else. So in this case, I want to replace it with weapon P210. This is how I call the gun. Now, since we're doing here the base version, the carry version, sorry, I'm going to call actually want to do a carry, but let's start with this to have the same setup of having a base to 10 and then having the target as a specialized version of it, for example. So I could replace all in one go, but I prefer to go one by one, because some of the things maybe I don't want to replace. So for example, the sounds, I can use the forged sounds if I don't have sounds ready-made for this gun. So that's something maybe I want to change later. But for now, I'm just going to go like this, hit replace. Going to keep the sounds here. Find next. Inventory name, obviously I'm going to change. Now here, be careful, because this is the 412 and we're actually looking at the 421 that we have down there. So that's a section we're going to have to change completely anyways. So I'm going to replace it for now. Here, these three, and manually here remove the 12th bit to not create any problems. So where was the next one here? The HUD. Remember that we called it P210 HUD, so that's good. However, visual, this is the world model. Here we called it a bit differently, so here we need to make sure that we call it the proper way, which was underscore world. There we go. Okay, let's find next. So this is now the base of the HUD, so this is fine. We replace this as well. Again, the visual here, this is the HUD visual, so we replace that. This looks fine. And this is a snag bit, so this is the specialized version, out of which we're going to copy and paste some of the things over here. So we're going to merge these two sections essentially, which will take a bit more time to not miss any of the specialities we have in here. But in essence, you can see there's some things we're gonna merge over. So for example, the ammunition, because the P210 is a 9mm, not a 9x18, so it's a 9x19. We're going to, of course, reuse all the animations and things we have in here. So we're going to be looking at these in a moment. But also what is important is that we change the stuff we have here in terms of the inventory, because of course we have created our own inventory icon set. So that's something we need to change. So let's start from the top. So we have here, we have the information about the weapon itself. So that's usually all fine because we took a gun and we changed it to a gun. So we didn't change anything here, I mean a pistol. However, the icon texture here, that's something else because we created a new one here. So here we called this P210. So that's what we're going to call this as well. It's the UI folder, that's the name of the file. Now the width of our gun is 2. You remember it was 2 grids and it's 1 high, and the position is on the top left, so that's 0 by 0. The upgrade icons is something that we didn't do, so we're just going to here reuse the upgrade icons of another gun. So for example, another Sig gun, that would make a lot of sense, so it looks nice. I'm going to look these up later and put them in here as well, but that's something that we need to change still. Good. Then let's continue here. We have the weight. So this is information we're going to grab from the internet, from Wikipedia, for example. What is the weight of that pistol? Costs, something similar. We're going to try to have a realistic cost in the sense of it should reflect, the performance of the gun, but at the same time also the availability. If it's something which is quite rare, it can be a bit more costly, or if it's very strong as well. These we have already done. Positions, orientation, all of that we're not going to touch unless it's off somehow in the game, but otherwise we're going to leave these things the same. Same for flame particle and smoke. No reason to change that. It's a pistol just like the one before. All of these things here is the same. We're not going to touch any of those. The upgrades, we might change them to the Sig upgrade tree. That might make sense. We're going to check. For now, we'll leave it the same because Fort is a gun that is in the base game. So this means that we don't need to go and edit any additional files to make it work. So we can just reuse that. And I think that's all fine. Fire mode here is the same thing. It's a semi-auto, so it's going to fire 1 shot per pull of the trigger. If we here would put a 2, it would basically fire 2 shots per pull, 3, etc., etc. If you want full auto, it would be -1. That would mean that this gun will shoot in full auto. And if you do it like this, it can shoot full auto and in semi-auto. We're going to leave it in semi-auto because that's what the gun is. As I mentioned, the ammo, we're going to change that. So here I'm going to grab the ammo that we have here at the bottom, like this, and put it here. Wonderful. Then the ammo, we check how much ammo it has, something we need to check. Here, a silencer, we don't have a silencer, we can just leave it like this. The silence status is essentially that we can put it here to 0. So it means that there is no silencer that can be equipped. There is no silencer. It still needs those things in game, otherwise we'll have an issue. But basically we just leave the status to 0. If we add a silencer later on, we can always change this and make it a 2 again, which means that it's a choice that you can add a silencer or remove it. The damage values here, we're going to copy the ones from the 9mm because since it's a 9mm, it's going to be better to use those and not the one from the 918. Where were we? Here. I've also copied the other information here about RPM, bullet speed, all of this. Now these are things I would typically research to have the appropriate numbers, but that's something that we can do offline. The rest, all of this is basically how reliable the gun is. It controls the recoil, it controls misfire probability, all of that. So here again, I'm going to tweak those slightly. For example, if I believe that the gun has a better reliability than the basic Fort, then I'm going to give it this a bit better numbers here. But again, that's some stuff to do in part as part of the testing, of the tweaking before you publish a mod. Sound, as you can see here, has additional sound because it has special animations done by Fire Breath. So this is where we're going to reuse that sound as well. Something important to note at this point is that some of the sounds are coming from here, and the sounds that are not specified in here basically are coming from the basic sounds of the fort. So this is probably a mix of the basic sounds of the game plus the ones added here. Ideally, you would want to have a full set of sounds just for your gun, for every single animation, a specific gun sound, so that you can really fine-tune this to the details. But you know, that's a luxury you sometimes just don't have. Good, so I'll do the research on all these detail bits that we talked about, and I'll add them into the file. And then in the last portion, I'll be talking about how to make the gun standalone. So to make sure that all the components that we're using here are either copied over or renamed and copied over to avoid conflict with the mods, so that you can make sure that your gun works on the vanilla installment of Anomaly without needing any other mods really. Having done the research and updated most of the things here, I decided, for example, to go with the Sig P210 upgrade tree, because I think it just fits better, as the P210 is basically the successor of the P210. So that seems just a smart choice. Then I've also unified all the details so that we have everything is properly laid out, and we have all everything we need. I've also done the whole sound part, where basically here I've also changed the path and the file names of the sounds from the 4 to this. So I'm including all of these sounds as part of this mod. Not because I want to steal, but simply because I want to make sure that my mod is fully standalone and does not require any other mod to function. So this is what I will write, and also in the mod's description, you know, that basically all these components are based off of other mods. The last bit to do here is the animation part. So as you can see here, this is where the animation is all referenced in the 421 animation. So this part here is basically the hand animation, and this is the HUD animation. Now what we need to do is to have the same thing, to not have conflicting animation files. I'm going to change all of this to the P210, and I will also need to edit the OMF file, that is basically the animation file, to have the proper names. I'm not going to edit the animations themselves, I'm going to keep them the same, but I'm going to edit this so that we basically have a copy of the 421 animations, but here for my 210. Again, this is not because I tend to steal from Firebreath, but this is simply because I can then make sure this gun is fully standalone and does not require other mods to be installed, so that it actually works. So I'm going to do all of that, and then I'm going to show you how to edit this also in the OMF file. First, the simplest is just to, you know, again, do Ctrl-H, and I'm going to replace this simply with P10. So you can see replace here like this. I'm going to replace all of them, and then I need to do the same basically in the OMF files. Now, since we're having here a few additional and special animations here, we're going to have to go through all of them everywhere and make sure that we don't miss any of the files when we change this in the files. So for now, I just need to change all of this like that. So all of them were changed. That's great. Let's quickly check manually also if we have missed anything. So far, it looks good. Perfect. So let's save this. And now let's edit as well the other files. For this, you can use the OMF editor and essentially go and load the two different OMF files. As you can see, I've already copied the files over here. So I'm going to here first change the name of those files so that I have them in the name set that I want. So again, here I'm going to call these P210, that's the HUD animation, and here we have the hand animation. This. Again, opening the OMF editor, let's load the HUD animation. Now, as you remember, the HUD animation does not have tons of very special namings, but still here we have in here fort. So for this, we need to go in here and change that to this. Next one. It's very important to not mess up names, otherwise stuff will not work. Okay, that's great. And now let's open up the hand animations where there's a bit more that we need to do, because we need to basically here edit this in all of them. Let's copy it, it will be a bit quicker. Since we have changed the names of the animations, we also need to make sure that the OGF is actually referencing the correct animation. Now remember, in Blender, we just exported the file directly, and this is of course not going to help us for our file, because it is still referencing the wrong animation file. So let's hide the world. Let's go here. So if you look here at the reference of the animation, then you see here it's still referencing the 421. Now, of course, we change it in here, and we can re-export it, or we can change it directly in the OGF editor. Now, I prefer to change it in here, because if we change it in here, we have the right one for all the later changes we might want to do. So I'm going to edit in here directly like that. I mean, you can copy paste it, or if you know exactly what it's called, type it like this. And that's it. We just re-export. Again, OGF. And here, meshes. And there you go. And that's it. Now it's referencing the correct one, and we can continue working on the different configurations. During this little intermission, I prepared or finished the file with all different tweaks that we have inside that we need to do. I also prepared a bunch of additional files. So for example, I've added the magazines for the Mac Redux patch. So for whoever uses Mac Redux will have nice magazines to use. I made the texts once in English and also once in Russian. So here I just used DeepL to translate the text. If it's crap, dear Russian speaking people, please tell me and I'll adjust it. I always think that a bit of flavor text is nice, because it just gives, it gives the gun a bit of context of why it's in the zone and how it's working, what it is, etc. I've already prepared also the text here for the target, which is the other version of the pistol that we didn't do in this tutorial, but that I have as a file, and that I will add to the mod as well, because I feel like, more is more. All right. Additionally, what I've also prepared here is a few additional folders that I'm currently not using, but that I will use. For example, there's for trader and for NPC loadout, for weapon parts, all kinds of additional things that for the first test of the weapon is not yet needed. But of course, these things will be added as well at the later stage, so that we really have a full, complete mod with all the components that are needed. Now that we have done that, all that needs left to do is to package it up in a zip file and add it to our MO2 instance. Let's see how it does. Alrighty. A little bit more sunshine, please. Much better. Okay, let's see where our pistol is at. Here it is. All right, so far looks good. Let's see how it does in the game. Let's add some more ammo. Pretty nice. As you can see here, there is the shell sticking out of the back there. That is something that we'll be fixing in in Blender, as we need to move the shell a little bit more to the front so that this does not happen. It's because the position, if you remember, was a bit more backwards compared to the shell in the Ford model. So because of that, we're seeing the shell here popping out through the back of the gun, basically. All right, so you see small little tweaks and fixes still need to be done, but then besides that, this looks pretty nice and is soon ready for inclusion in the game. And that's it, folks. The rest of the tasks to be done are repetitions of elements shown before, so I'm not going to reshow them again. I hope it was as interesting and entertaining as also useful, and that it might help you with one or the other thing when you go mod on your own weapons into Anomaly. I hope that this video will also be used maybe as reference or as a quick lookup if something is around that you don't know how to do, and you can find quick help here. Also, I'd like to reiterate that there are many modders out there who are much more skilled than I am, and who have way better techniques of achieving one or the other thing that I've shown in this video. And with this, I hope that I'll be soon seeing tons of new cool mods popping up on ModDB. Good hunting, Stalkers. See you in the zone.